At the end of the last video, I showed you that I'd mounted it in my chassis stand that I purchased. These chassis stands are great. However, the S-38 poses a little bit of a challenge because there's only two tie points at the back of each side, one on each side, and then at the front of the case it's held in place by the screws on these two extra panels or mounting brackets here. So what I ended up doing is I went out and improvised a little bit, bought some of these L brackets, covered one up with electrical tape to electrically isolate it from the chassis, since that's a hot chassis. Back here it's electrically isolated. I replaced the rubber grommets back here. I also replaced the rubber grommet at the back of the variable capacitor, and then I replaced the rubber grommets that hold these brackets on here. And the reason that there's rubber grommets here is to electrically isolate since these attach to the case itself, these electrically isolate the hot chassis from the case, and that's what's going on back here too. So while I'm working on it, I went ahead and wrapped those, you can see there, with black electrical tape, mounted it here. Need to get some shorter screws. This is what I had on hand. Then I'm temporarily holding it in place on both sides with zip ties. So that does a good job. When I flip it over, now it's staying in place, so I can get started working on the on recapping it and checking resistors and so on and so forth. Here's what the chassis looks like flipped over in the chassis stand. Obviously, as I said before, we're going to have to shotgun all the paper caps. I'm not going to go ahead and try to restuff these. I'm just going to go ahead and replace them. The other thing I need to check on is I believe there's some mica mold caps in here. I have to check and see if those are just mica mold or if they're actually like silver mica caps. So we'll have to work on that. This definitely is coming out and getting replaced. That's not original. So that's my next step. What I'm going to go through is I'm going to go through and double check. I think this is all original, but just to be sure, I'll go through on the schematic and the parts listing from Riders or Sam's and double check, make these are the correct values, or go through and pull my capacitors out, or pull my new capacitors out, or mark them for the right direction. If you do a search on YouTube for Mr. Carlson's lab, I'm not going to go through on how you determine what direction they need to be put in, because he's already got a good video on why to do it and how to do it. But that's what I'll do, and then I'll start shotgunning those, and then we'll start checking the resistors. Alright, I just got done checking for the shield side of all the capacitors, or at least most of them. And again, I'm not going to go through this, but if you, on YouTube, if you look up Mr. Carlson's lab, he's got a whole video on why to do this and how to do this. So we'll go ahead and start putting caps in. I've got the wires replaced on the audio transformer, except for the primaries. They're fine. So I'll reuse those, but I went ahead and replaced these. One thing I did figure out after a little bit of research is the stand core, A-3856 I believe it is, was a universal replacement transformer that they used back in the day. Checked it out, it seems to be alright, so we're going to go, and it fits real well on the chassis, it fits in the original holes, so we're going to go ahead and leave that. Interesting thing, found this 10 ohm, I think it's a 2 watt resistor that actually appears to be across the wires that go to the dial light. That's not supposed to be there. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and replace that. My guess is they tried to use a different bulb with it than what I originally came with, and they had to lower the voltage on it. So we're going to remove that, make sure we have the correct pilot light in there, so to speak, and keep on changing out caps and resistors on this. I'm trying to figure out a few things here. Okay, on switch S5B, which is the AMCW switch, there's two parts to it. There's A and B. Up here, we've got the A part here, which is a, if I remember, it's a 470 ohm resistor that goes to ground. Or no. Yeah, it's a 470 ohm resistor that goes to ground, and then on the other side of it, it comes down and goes into one of the transformers. Now, this side of it, the B side of it, comes down and goes through a, what should be another 470 ohm resistor, but for some reason we have a totally different resistor here. Then it's supposed to go into a 0.01 paper cap, which would be this, and from there it's supposed to go into ground, but it's not connecting to ground. Ground lug's right here. Then off of pin 2, according to this, off of pin 2, we come out of here and we tie in, and there's a 47K resistor that goes to ground, and then there's a mica capacitor, 220 mica capacitor that comes here, and there's another 470 that goes to ground, and then off of the T6 that goes to ground also, which from what I can tell would be tied into the shielding also. Then off of pin 3, we come through here and we go to one of the taps on T6. This side goes on and goes the other end of T6. This is the shield that is grounded. However, up here we've got a 470 ohm resistor here that goes up here, not to ground. We have our 220 that comes over here and ties in here, and then from there we have our 470 that comes over here and ties in here, not to ground. So something is not something's not right here. So what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and take these out, do some measurements to make sure that we're not grounding somewhere else, and then I will reconnect them up correctly. And I'll put the proper resistor in here. I think that's a that would be a 15K resistor there, I believe. And then we also have some irregularities over here. I'll cover that next. But I'll go ahead and disassemble this, do a little bit of testing on it, and then put it back the way it should be. We've made quite a bit of significant progress this week. I'd hoped to get a video up sooner, but work kept me busy. And anyway, the most significant change you'll probably notice right up front is we replaced the electrolyte capacitors with with 4 individual ones on a terminal strip. And actually it was supposed to have a 40 230s and a 20 MFD on them, and this one, probably can't read that, as a 40 10 40 and 25. Probably didn't make a too significant difference on it, but we put back what the schematic called for. Here's our pile of parts down here that we've replaced. All these paper capacitors. These are a couple mica mold capacitors, which are about the same as the paper capacitors, from what I understand. All these resistors. Now, there's only all the resistors in the schematic. It called for half-watt resistors. Some of these were a little bit larger. The only one that wasn't half-watt was this 1-watt 680 ohm resistor that used to go up here. I had to order a new one because I didn't have a 680 ohm 1-watt resistor. An interesting thing is this is what I got was this one right here. It's supposed to be 1 watt, and it's quite a bit smaller. In fact, it's smaller than some of the half-watt ones that I used. So hopefully that works out all right. Or watch that. And then went through and replaced all this. Now there's 2 paper capacitors still here. There's this one here and this one here. I'm going to go ahead and put an isolation transformer on it, and talking to a few people on antiqueradioforum.com, they tell me if I use an isolation transformer that actually I can remove this one and this one, and then I can also swap this out for just a piece of wire, this wire that goes from the antenna to the chassis. So I'll go ahead and do that yet. The isolation transformer I'll probably mount on the top. I ordered 3 from Mauser. They had 3 in stock, and by the time I ordered them, they were back ordered later in the day. So I went ahead and went to Newark and ordered 3 from them too, because I got quite a few of these units to do, and they're supposed to be in on Tuesday. So we'll do all that rewiring according to the schematic that I got off of antiqueradio.com. This is how you wire it in. We're put a fuse in there yet, and then we have to add a 12 UF cap there, and then we'll put a safety cap across that. So we'll finish that up next week when it comes in. So I'll go ahead and do this after we get done with the video, removing those, and then I'll set this aside until that comes in, and we'll go ahead and start on the chassis. I'm trying to think if there's anything else. You see there's this one regular carbon one here. I didn't have one of these other ones, but I had some of these and they tested out good, so I used that one there, and it should work pretty good. And I was able to get everything else soldered back in, put into place. So hopefully next week, after we get that isolation transformer in, should be able to fire it up for the first time. Oh, I've still got to test all the capacitors, or do that, or not capacitors. Got to test the vacuum tubes, and we'll see if I need to order any replacements on those. And like I said, we'll go ahead, and next step will be I'll clean up the speaker, and I'll go ahead and we'll media blast the cabinet and get it powder coated and apply the labels back to it. So hopefully we get, by midweek next week, we'll have it working and operating and receiving some signals, and we should be able to get it out of the shop here fairly quick. I almost forgot to mention in the previous, or a little bit earlier in the video, I was questioning some of the connections and part values in here. And I went and grabbed one of the other ones that I have that's waiting to be restored and looked at it, and it was wired up the same way with the same components, which was totally curious to me. So I asked a few questions on the forums and found out that this was a production run change. The original one I had was, or the original manual I downloaded and everything, it was called, I think it was called Production Note 2, and turns out there's another Production Note 2, but it's dated later with the changes on it. So we went ahead and wired that back up and replaced the components with the same values. The only thing I had was this on the schematic, even in the second schematic, was a 220K resistor, and on both this one and the other machine that I was looking, or radio that I was looking at, it was a 240K. So I went ahead and replaced it with a 240K, thinking maybe that was a production change that just didn't get documented, or at least that, you know, I have access to those documents. So we'll see how that works out. So that's it for this video. I guess our sign off now. This is KB0ASQ. Till next time.